India today has accessed satellite images collected over the past 72 hours, which reveals continued Russian military activity in a number of key Ukrainian cities. These images are from the besieged city of Mariupol. It shows deployment of Russian tanks, Russian military vehicles are on the streets. Artillery forces remain deployed around each of these cities, 3 of them, and they continue to fire on civilian areas, with widespread damage seen on residential buildings and infrastructure. Russian forces are going all out to capture the city of Mariupol and have even entered the heart of the city. In spite of this, Ukrainians are refusing to give in. Officials from Ukraine have rejected a Russian demand that their forces in the city of Mariupol lay down arms and raise white flags in exchange for a safe passage. The question does not arise, as what Ukraine has said. No question of either giving up arms or allowing passage of Russians to allow them control of Mariupol, the strategic port city. So Ukrainians are defiant as well, but Russia continues with its relentless pursuit of the critical port city, strategically important of Mariupol. In fact, Russia made an offer saying that forces in the besieged strategic port city of Mariupol lay down arms and raise white flags, and a safe corridor is going to be provided to Ukrainians in Mariupol, both the soldiers and civilians, to move out. Ukraine has rejected that offer.
That it will take you several generations to recover.
So why is Putin really hell-bent on taking over Mariupol? Why is it so important for Putin? Forces are going all out to capture the port city of Mariupol, have reportedly even entered the heart of Ukraine's third largest city. Battered and ravaged, Ukraine has refused to lay down arms and surrender. This comes after Russia hit an art school sheltering 400 people only hours before offering to open 2 corridors out of the city. Ukrainians have said
Ukrainian forces to lay down their arms and surrender. The Deputy Prime Minister of the country responded with a clear no to Moscow's offer. Ukraine has been putting up a brave face, but on the ground things are going from bad to worse visibly. Russia over the weekend bombed an art school that was converted into a shelter with 400-odd civilians inside. President Zelensky referred to the strike as the work of a mass murderer, putting the global spotlight on the city of Mariupol. Hundreds of residents still remain stranded in the port city and are fast running out of food and water. With non-stop shelling, people are forced to stay underground, coming up only to bid farewell to their loved ones and burying them anywhere they find space.
We have been in a basement for 11 days. This is the 25th day of war. We have been counting every one of them. We hope for the best, to live as humans. The apartment have been broken. Everything is broken. Where can we go from the basement? We are cooking at a fire. For now, we have some food and some firewood. In a week, we will have nothing, no food at all. What should we do?
But why is President Putin hell-bent on grabbing Mariupol? For starters, capturing this city would mean a full 100% control of the Sea of Azov. It's also just 50 kilometers from Russia and 85 kilometers from the Donetsk and Lugansk regions, both Russian-held. Putin is doing everything he can to get Mariupol to surrender because it will help him extend dominance over Crimea. And the Russian president's Mariupol plan has led to unprecedented civilian casualties, a children's hospital bombed, mass graves in the heart of the city, and even shelters completely destroyed. With Rajesh Pawar in Kiev, Ukraine, Bureau Report, India Today.
Rajesh Pawar is joining us from Kiev. For more on that, Rajesh, for our viewers, do explain why is Russia relentless in its pursuit, in its desire to take over Mariupol and the strategic importance of this port city?
See, I have explained this before and I'll explain it again. Mariupol is in the coast of Azov Sea. Azov Sea, the eastern coast, whole of eastern coast is with Russia. It's a part of Russian territory, Russian Federation. The west coast of the sea is with Ukraine, which falls into Donetsk Oblast. Now, Russia has declared Donetsk Oblast as an independent republic. And this Mariupol town is the second biggest town in Donetsk Oblast. So it's important for Russia to take control of this town before they go for negotiations, any kind of peace negotiations with Ukraine, so that they can lay claim to the whole of Donetsk Oblast, including Mariupol city. For Ukraine, it is important because if they have the control at the time of negotiations, they can press on that this will stay with Ukraine. And also, it is very important for Ukraine from the commerce point of view, because a lot of import-export of Ukraine takes place from this port. This is the only big port they have in Azov Sea. And as for the strategic importance of this port is concerned, Ukraine has a naval base there, and once Russia has this, the entire Azov Sea from east to west will be in total control of Russia, and which is of much strategic importance to Russia also. Over to you.
Yes. Rajesh, on Friday, the US president is in Poland to discuss the situation in Ukraine, meeting with NATO countries. But what I want to ask you is the separate line of conversation that Ukraine and Russia have, and the several rounds of talks that have been held to discuss the situation. Get us the very latest about these talks between Ukraine and Russia, this bilateral.
Look, Russia and Ukraine, they have been talking from the day one of this war. In fact, before the war started. And somehow they had very strong disagreement, and that's the reason this war started. And we have seen softening of the stand by both Russia and Ukraine at times. And then very next day, we see hardening of stances from both the sides. So this seesaw battle has been going on between these two countries. Now, as we speak, after 4 rounds of physical talking, they have been having talks every day on everyday basis in virtual meetings, and these humanitarian corridors and exchange of prisoners, which we have heard in last few days, are a result of these talks which are being held every day on a daily basis between the representatives of these two countries. About future, we heard there's a 15-point peace plan on which both the sides agreed to discuss, which was later on denied by the Ukrainians. They said there's nothing such 15-point on which we have agreed to talk. So it's a kind of, again, like the fog of the battle, we are having a fog of diplomacy as well. Things are not very clear, but what I can say is a lot on this bilateral talk between Russia and Ukraine will depend on the outcome of NATO meeting, which Joe Biden is going to attend in Brussels, and then talks he's going to have with Polish Prime Minister in Poland, because Poland has come out with a very interesting idea of putting peacekeepers into Ukraine, which is in a way doesn't look possible. And if it has to be in any way agreeable to Russia, then they cannot be America or NATO allies putting their soldiers there. They have to be from neutral countries. And that is where India will come into play, which will play a probably, in case this gets through, a very important part in this whole plan.
All right, all eyes on that important meeting. But before that, finger pointing has started with US telling India that their position on Russia has been shaky, something that India has not been extremely happy about. That sort of criticism coming our way. Rajesh, thank you so much for getting us your perspective on that important story. Staying with us, Russian strikes continue to bleed Ukraine for 27 days now. Destruction and devastation has taken over Ukraine's besieged southern city of Kherson as residential buildings turn into ruins, bruised and battered with relentless Russian attacks. Civilians in Kherson are continuing to fight back, showing unprecedented resilience. Civilians in Kherson hit streets protesting against the invaders. only to be opened fired at from the enemy troops. Kherson was one of the first cities to witness Russian troops on its streets, making a symbolic move. The army from Russia had removed Ukrainian flag from the city administration building on the 17th of March, amid heavy resistance from the citizens, as the besieged city refused to cooperate with enemy troops. Russian forces have even lost one of their top commanders amid battle for Kherson. Kiev has a similar story to tell. Russian hellbirds have left the Ukrainian capital in shambles. Putin's missiles continue to ravage civilian buildings. Amid a raging war, Ukrainian president has warned that the failure of peace talks would lead to World War III.
На вашій площі, на вулицях ми були всі разом з вами, 40 мільйонів українців нашої держави, мільйони і мільйони українців у світі. Ми всі бачили, як ви стоїте, які ви. Ми всі відчули, як ви хочете повернути свободу на землі, де, споглядаючи чумацький шлях, чумаки ходили по сіль. Звичайні українці, а зараз борці, чоловіки і жінки, які піднімаються за нашу державу повсюди. На півдні, на сході, на півночі, у центрі, на заході і за кордоном. Піднімаються так, що ворог не вірить, що це дійсно реальність. Але ми змусимо їх повірити. Змусимо запам'ятати, що до нас їм дороги немає. І ніколи не буде. У Київ, який мужньо і велично стоїть над Дніпром.
Since Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine, at least 500 people have been killed in the city of Kharkiv alone. It's the second largest city of Ukraine and is under heavy Russian bombardment. Scenes of death, despair and destruction are visible here in the city. Yes, ma'am. A former Ukrainian MP, a journalist and activist, Titania Chornovol is already known to be a fearsome figure in Ukraine. Titania has now joined the war efforts, fighting off Russian invaders with anti-tank weapons. Here's more.
This is Tatiana Chornovol, a former nationalist member of parliament who is now fighting in frontline trenches, working as an anti-tank guided missile operator just north of Kiev. Here, she describes her most recent hit.
I switched it on and saw tanks on the screen. They just entered within the range of my missile. I took aim and destroyed the first tank. Interestingly, the rocket was flying for quite some time. Perhaps the tanks registered the rocket's launch and managed to turn back, but I shot it right at the fuel tanks and the ammunition load has detonated. The tank literally flew off the road and now it is somewhere in the road ditched in the forest. After that, we came under fire, not for long. All during this time, Russian military vehicles were turning back and escaping. So one destroyed tank was enough to stop the attack, for the column to turn back and run away.
A high-profile anti-corruption campaigner, Tatiana, who is also a former journalist, was one of the leaders in the Euromaidan protests. She turned to politics in 2014 and was elected a member of the Nationalist and Conservative People's Front Party. But now she's part of a unit tasked with engaging and destroying Russian tanks and armoured vehicles to stop its approach on the Ukrainian capital. Tatiana is a war widow herself. Her husband, Mykola Berezovy, served as a volunteer fighter in the right-wing paramilitary Azov battalion. He was killed during fighting in eastern Ukraine in 2014.
Well, there are two wars being fought simultaneously in Ukraine. One in the battlefield, one is the information war on social media. Ukraine's president daily online addresses from the streets of Kiev have made him a war icon. Civilians are posting videos of Russian bombing on residential buildings. Our next report tells you how Ukraine now is dominating this information war.
The Russia-Ukraine war is about to enter the fifth week. Moscow continues to rain missiles on key Ukrainian cities. But the war-ravaged Kiev is still holding fort. While a war is being fought on the ground with guns and tanks, another is being fought online, the social media war. As the Ukrainian president remains bunkered down in Kiev amid fears of assassination attempts, Zelensky's daily video addresses usually published with English subtitles, have made him a war icon. Zelensky owes some of his success to Tesla's CEO, who agreed to the president's request to activate Starlink satellite internet in the war-torn country. Elon Musk activated satellite broadband services across Ukraine, allowing civilians an easy access to the internet. When it comes to taking on Russia, all hands are on the deck. Civilians have also joined the social media war, sharing success of their forces and exposing Russian attacks on schools and bomb shelters. Kiev's mayor and former boxing champion Vitaly Klitschko, for instance, shared evidence shattering Russian claims of not attacking residential buildings. Klitschko did that by visiting Russian targets and giving first-hand info.
Ту пропаганду, що йдеться війна, звільнення України проти військових, бомбять, як і в Харкові, як і в Маріуполі, як і в Чернігові, житлові райони. І зараз мета агресора, мета орків – наше рідне місто, місто Київ.
Thanks to its relentless digital drive, Kiev is getting international support. Football legend David Beckham has handed over his Instagram account to a Ukrainian doctor working in Kharkiv. Beckham has over 70 million followers on the photo-sharing app.
Hi everyone, so I'm handing over my social media to Irina, the head of the Regional Perinatal Centre in Kharkiv, Ukraine. There, she is working with pregnant mothers to help them give birth safely.
Привет, друзья! Меня зовут Ирина. Я сегодня оккупировала инстаграм-страницу Дэвида Бекхэма. В мирное время я руководитель Харьковского регионального перинатального центра и детский анестезиолог.
Actors Mila Kunis and Ashton Kutcher have raised over $30 million for Ukrainian refugees fleeing the country. Kunis, who was born in Ukraine, and Kutcher have expressed gratitude for the outpouring of support.
We hit our goal.
Over $30 million raised.
Over 65,000 of you donated. We are overwhelmed with gratitude for the support. And while this is far from a solve of the problem, our collective effort will provide a softer landing for so many people as they forge ahead into their future of uncertainty.
In the ever-intensifying information war, Ukraine has dominated the social media right from the first day of Russian invasion. Bureau Report, India Today.
India's steadfast neutral stance in Ukraine war continues to rile the US. US President Joseph Biden said India was an exception among Washington's Quad allies with its shaky response to the Russian invasion. Biden called for a united front throughout NATO and warned against Putin splitting the military alliance. Quad has been divided over India's response to the Russian invasion, while Japan urged India to take a tougher line against the Russian invasion. Australia said it understands India's position. President of Ukraine, Zelensky, has meanwhile showed the mirror to the US, calling its military alliance NATO afraid of Russia. Zelensky has repeatedly called for a no-fly zone over Ukraine, but the West declined the request, fearing direct war with Ukraine.
In response to his aggression, there has been, we presented a united front throughout NATO and in the Pacific. The Quad is, with the possible exception of India being somewhat shaky on some of this, but Japan has been extremely strong, so has Australia, in terms of dealing with Putin's aggression.
Вони повинні завтра сказати, що вони Україну беруть в НАТО, не гратися більше з ним, або сказати, ми зараз не беремо, що є правда, і вони самі розуміють, що вони не хочуть воювати з Росією, тому вони нас це не беруть. Відповідь ж дуже проста. Ми ж всі вже розуміємо, нас не беруть, тому що бояться Росії. Ось і все.
Hours after Russia's attack on Ukraine began, 5 German warships set sail for Latvia to help protect NATO's eastern flank. Russia's invasion has propelled the alliance into what Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has called a new normal. Here's the news report.
Hours after Russia's attack on Ukraine began, 5 German warships set sail for Latvia to help protect the most vulnerable part of NATO's eastern flank. Russia's invasion has propelled the alliance into what Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg has called a new normal. It looks a lot like the past. NATO was founded in 1949 to defend against the Soviet threat. Now a new Iron Curtain could fall across Europe. NATO needs to ensure its members are not behind it if it does. NATO has expanded eastwards since the 1990s, bringing in former Soviet states such as Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia, where these French troops disembarked last week. A single overland corridor connects them to the rest of NATO territory, and it's squeezed between the heavily armed Russian enclave of Kaliningrad and Moscow ally Belarus. An emboldened Russia could encircle the Baltic states and cut them off from the rest of the alliance. That's where the Latvian mission comes in, a regular mine-clearing exercise that was brought forward by Russia's invasion. One goal is to keep the waterway open, the other is a show of strength. This was German naval commander Terje Schmidt-Eliasson on board the Elbe in Riga's harbour.
We'll be 12 units from 6 countries, and we are essentially showing our presence in the eastern Baltic.
Direct confrontation between NATO and Russia could touch off a global conflict. One retired NATO commander told Reuters the alliance is considering whether deterrence is enough. Not according to Lithuanian Foreign Minister Gabrielius Landsbergis last week.
We are convinced in the Baltic states that we need to move from deterrence to a standing defense, and has to come from NATO planning leadership, that they would start looking into the region differently than they had throughout the last 2 decades.
Since the invasion, NATO allies have also moved 5 aircraft carriers into European waters, increased the number of warplanes in NATO airspace, and more than doubled the size of combat units in the Baltics and Poland. NATO also faces a return to mechanised warfare and a huge increase in defence spending.
Modern warfares are not just limited to battlefields. Social media has become the new battlefield, but who is leading the social media war for Russian President Vladimir Putin? Our next report tells you about the 4 Russian women who are trying to spin the narrative of war.
The war in Ukraine is not being fought on the borders only. There is another war raging in the info space. While Ukraine has been successful in seeking and getting global sympathy, Russia's focus is on garnering domestic support for the war. Over 59% Russians support the invasion of Ukraine, according to surveys by various agencies in Russia. Proof that Vladimir Putin is winning the info war in his country. Russia's propaganda machinery is led by 4 women. Leading the charge is Maria Zakharova, the Director Information and Press Department at the Russian Foreign Ministry. Maria has helped sell the idea at home that the West has launched an information war against Russia. She has also accused the West of information terrorism. Next on the list of propaganda crusaders is Editor-in-Chief of Russia Today, Margarita Simonyan. Margarita is sanctioned by the European Union for promoting a positive attitude to the annexation of Crimea and the actions of Ukrainian separatists. Another key Russian figure in the info war is Maria Boutina. In 2018, Boutina was accused in the US of being a Russian spy. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison. 9 months later, she was extradited to Russia. Boutina was elected as a member of the Duma, the lower house of Russia's Federal Assembly. The last on the list is Valentina Matwienko, a Russian senator and the Speaker of the Upper House. Born in western Ukraine, Matwienko has justified Russia's actions, saying that the invasion is the only way to end this brotherly war. While the West has imposed various sanctions to curb the spread of Russian propaganda, but the truth is, Russia doesn't have to sell the war globally to keep it going. It just has to sell it to to its citizens. Right now, Russians seems to be buying Vladimir Putin's war. Bureau Report, India Today.
And a Moscow court found Meta guilty of extremist activity, but said the ruling would not affect the US firm's messenger service WhatsApp. Here's more.
Facebook owner Meta was labelled an extremist organisation by a Moscow court Monday that upheld a lawsuit filed by Russian state prosecutors on banning the activities of Meta on Russian territory. But it said the decision would not apply to its WhatsApp messenger service, instead focusing on Instagram and Facebook, which are already banned. The court said the decision didn't apply to WhatsApp, quote, due to its lack of functionality for the public dissemination of information. But it may be falling out of favour with Russians. Analysis of mobile internet traffic on Monday showed that Telegram has overtaken WhatsApp to become the country's most popular messaging tool in recent weeks. Meta did not immediately respond to a request for comment, but the company's lawyer had said in court earlier on Monday that the firm was not carrying out extremist activities and stood against Russophobia. That's according to Interfax news agency. Russia banned Facebook for restricting access to Russian media, while Instagram was blocked after Meta said it would allow social media users in Ukraine to post messages urging violence against Vladimir Putin and troops Moscow sent into Ukraine last month. Meta has since narrowed its guidance to prohibit calls for the death of a head of state and said its guidance should never be interpreted as condoning violence against Russians in general. The implications of labelling Meta an extremist organisation remain unclear.